Hey everyone, Brian Beeler coming to you from Storage Review, and even have Kevin here today, the data grump. And I'm calling him that because, well, we'll get into it in just a second, but he always makes my life using a NAS a little more difficult around the office. I just want to present all the files out and share them with Vince, our video guy, and our team that's distributed, make it easy for them to get stuff. And that's where NASs come in really, really handy. It's really easy to create a file share, put the stuff on there, photos, video, audio files, whatever you want, and share them to your team. But that's sometimes problematic.
Well, I love using admin and then just password. So
Well, that's true too.
yeah, normally you shouldn't do that though.
You shouldn't do that, but you also have to be careful with how you share your files with a NAS. NASs are just so great because they simplify everything. This QNAP sitting here and the Synology underneath it are some of the larger tower form factors from those two companies. But just with the simplicity of the NAS and all the apps and all the sharing and all the capabilities comes some challenges. And we were reminded of that last week. QNAP sent out an email that said, hey, everybody, QNAP customers, you got to be careful with how your NAS is set up because there's a lot of attacks. There's password exploits, as you were just talking about. There's ransomware. And if this is what you're using to keep family photos on, business documents, your security footage, whatever it is, you got to take care of it and make sure it's secure.
Yeah, now a big problem that always come into is, Synology and QNAP have approached it in certain ways, but you've had default usernames. So for a long time, the default username for any of these NASs were admin.
Right.
And if you are under a brute force attack, you're going to have a ton of people trying to access it with username admin and then try a ton of passwords.
Well, before they even get to that brute force attack, how are they finding a QNAP or a Synology or any other NAS for that matter that's public facing?
So most consumer NASs will present with UPnP enabled and automatically try and get it out onto the web. So port 8080 or something along those lines. And you might have never used a cloud app on your NAS, but it might still be presented.
Yeah.
And so a big part of QNAP's approach was turn off the automatic router setup that they had enabled by default on the NAS, disable UPnP on the NAS, and try and lock down some of those items that may or may not be needed. But that also goes into a heavy-handed approach where you might be leveraging those and need those. So, I mean, you're like, okay, well, I'm locking it down, all of a sudden it turns off your external access.
Right, then it's an external hard drive. At a certain point, if you remove all those great NAS features, and that's part of the challenge and part of the balance when it comes to this. So Lyle put together a piece on the site for QNAP specifically that goes through and talks about how you can enable some of those security functions. And in this video, what we're going to do is walk through a Synology and a QNAP and kind of show you some of the starting points for where you can go to disable admin accounts, to modify security settings. Because yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people probably were gifted these for Christmas. So if you're a data nerd like we are, and people say, well, what do you want for Christmas? Oh, I need a new NAS. I need something with a little more RAM, a little more processing power, or maybe I don't have one yet, and my photo sets are exploding. So how do I get a device to organize those and then give me some resiliency, some backup to the cloud possibility? So there's a lot there, but a lot of these things probably got fired up in January and people don't know how to secure them.
Yeah, and one area that we will go into that I really enjoy that both Synology and QNAP support, I'm not sure about others, but it's automatically blocking IP addresses based on too high of a number of invalid attempts. So
we've seen that here, right? I mean, we've had attacks like that.
Yeah, there have been times where we finish a review and all of a sudden we'll get like 30 attempts per second or something on some of our NASs.
Is that because we publicly put our IP address in our screenshots or anything?
I'm not entirely sure about that, but it's just as things kind of go around, you'll. I suppose it's bad enough when you have one open in your network. When you have multiples open up in your network, especially since when we're running reviews, we might have some with like admin password, and you log in and see like, hey, someone already set it up for us.
Someone already pre-stole our data?
Yes. Having a way to block those users after one attempt over any number of minutes can be pretty nice. Now, if you forget your password or you kind of mash it in incorrectly, you could block yourself, but there's some ways around that.
Okay, so let's tear into these. Which one do you want to start with, Synology or QNAP?
Synology.
Okay, so let's fire up the Synology and take a look at that through the DSM, which is their software management tool, to take a look at it. Okay, so you've logged into Synology and you failed to do the login screen so everyone can see your username, which would have been halfway to getting hacked.
Generally, you could probably guess with our company name, we probably use the username storage review on every single review. Because if you're looking at like a user...
Oh, no, you just revealed it. Okay.
Yeah, super secret storage review.
All right, so run through quickly here what Synology users should be looking at.
Okay, so on here, by default, you hop into security, and this is through the little control panel area. You're going to look at here and hop onto the protection tab. So in here, the main feature is auto block, which this is going to be the protection of a certain number of login attempts. How many attempts do you want to do before it triggers this rule, and then within a certain time span.
So this is what you were talking about before. If you forget your password or mash it wrong too many times after too many IPAs on a Saturday night, you could lock yourself out.
Yes, and what I really like about Synology is you can edit these fields to be anything. As we'll see in a little bit on the QNAP side, you have to use predefined options. But what I do on all of the Synologies that I've messed around with and deployed in the field, my login attempts is 1, and my within is 9,000 minutes. So basically, you ever fail, you're banned until you're manually removed off the list.
See, that wouldn't work for me, especially in the aforementioned IPA example. I've told you how much barbecue sauce I've bought off TikTok in the middle of the night.
That always concerns me because I've never accidentally bought like barbecue sauce.
Well, I didn't accidentally. I bought it on purpose. I just don't remember buying it. It's just the problem. Okay, so for me, maybe not 1, but for what's reasonable here, 3 or 5 attempts?
Yeah. Now, what you could do is, if you're remote or whatever and you have to get on, you may want to enable some sort of block expiration. So in this case, like you could set it, enable it so the blocks get removed off the list after a period of days or, days. But I really like to have login attempts at least 2 or 3. That's going to give you a time period to cover most people that are going to be incorrectly logging in, maybe give you 1 shot if you use the wrong password. But minutes, I put this thing, I think it's like 10,000 is the most, but I like having a really broad segment here because if you're a bot, you're probably going to be caught in the span of a few seconds on a number of login attempts. But if you're more of a nefarious user, you might spread those out thinking like, okay, well...
Oh, slow play it a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to block me after a certain number of attempts within like 5 minutes, but what if I give it an attempt every hour? So
you might impersonate a drunk person that had too many IPAs.
Yes. Now, for your problem...
drinking problem?
Yes, there's some ways around that.
Okay, thank you.
Classes and such, but...
Send me an 800 number.
There's a allow and block list. Now, what you can do for here is, say, Brian always hops on and tries to drunk log in from his home network. You can make sure that that's protected, or if you have an external IP range, because most people, they're going to be in an area where the IP address might cycle every few weeks or something. You can put in an IP range where if you... are in this particular area. Now it could be like Spectrum has a certain IP block for our little metro area or something. Put in an IP range, and if you're in that, you're fine if you give it a couple of wrong attempts, because the chances of someone in that range trying to log in is probably pretty minuscule. You could probably do geo blocking and block certain country segments and cover yourself to cover like 99% of the incoming bots. But there's some options around this to protect yourself. And then you can also see the block list. So occasionally if I've ever like mashed the wrong thing and blocked myself from one of the units, I log in from another device, generally remote desktop from like a phone or something, and then hop on, find my IP address, remove, and then go about my business. But this is probably one of the best ways to protect your NAS because um, you could have a number of users trying to access this thing, and usually your concern for login attempts always comes down from a particular IP group or range, and you want to protect yourself after a couple of attempts. Like most people, you might have one wrong password attempt, but you're probably not going to have 5 or 10.
Right.
And while 5 minutes is nice to cover the rapid attack of bots, I think the spaces out pretty far so it covers any wrong attempt in a few days span or so.
Okay.
Now,
what else do we have in here to look at?
well, you have a lot of these will go into firewall or the SSL certificate or other areas where just general good practices for making sure nothing's open that doesn't have to be open. And Synology does have things on here. No, right-click, don't save. To handle Quick Connect, which you can give it a dynamic name, and you could type in like Forbay NAS or whatever you want to call your particular NAS in the Synology group, and you can use the Quick Connect domain. So no matter what the IP range or what the IP is at that time, if it's accessible online, you can route into it.
So that's for remote connecting through a browser or possibly through the Synology apps for your phone or whatnot.
Well, yeah, so any of the Synology apps, you can type in a Quick Connect name, and it will automatically tunnel into the device. And a lot of those, you can tunnel in without even having ports open. So,
well, that makes it really simple for new users of the Synology. Or people that don't know networking, right?
And it can be pretty safe because you can access your Synology from the web without having to have a port just always sitting there open for anyone to try and see that it's open. It might not work for all applications because certain areas you still need ports forwarded for like security cameras or things along those lines. But for the average user, it's a pretty good tool. And then you can also go in for like router configuration. It'll set up automatically 4 ports for you. Now, it's not on here by default, which is nice because you don't want it to go in and automatically open up things on the fly. But if you have a bunch of different applications on here with, like each application needs certain like 2 ports open or something, it makes it easier instead of like putting the NAS into a DMZ zone and just like going wild, wild west on it.
I've already glazed over at thinking about all the networking choices. Well, Synology was one of the early ones, weren't they, where they integrated with a few switch and access point vendors so that you could pick it off the list and it would automatically connect to it and either told you or actually made the settings changes.
Yeah, and this is a little bit nicer in the event that you don't want to have like UPnP enabled because it's doing full proper port forwarding commands into the router. But again, it's a lot of these things. This type of solution, it's moving to the realm where you really need to know what you're doing and understand what you're opening up, because if you just broadly forward a bunch of ports to your NAS, you might not realize what you're opening up or exposing yourself to. So it's pretty good that a lot of these things aren't enabled by default, but there are some areas to further protect yourself.
All right. And you already said by default now, these days, Synology doesn't ship with admin account enabled.
Well, on all of these units, they ship without anything, period. So these things you'll install the software, and then you, as you're going through that process, it makes you give the NAS a name, and then also what username you want to connect with. So at that time, you couldn't create anything. You could be like Brian's box or Brian's bunch of disks or something like that, and that could be.
Those are good ideas.
Yeah, it could be your username at home.
I just called mine Synology.
Yeah.
All right. So what's next? You want to go hit QNAP and go over some of the same things?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here is the QNAP desktop and
QTS.
Yes, QTS, and they also have QUTS for their ZFS-based one.
Yeah. So for the ZFS, that's a good note. Is there any difference for those users, or are the settings relatively similar?
I believe they're in the same spots. Most of the settings I've seen that differ are going to be on storage options.
Okay.
Okay, so on here we go to pop open the control panel, head on over to security, and we see some of the same options. So there's a allow and deny list, so you can deny connections or allow connections from certain IP ranges. And while there are options on here for enabling things by username, for this type of area, you really need to do IP blocking. Um, Now, QNAP has these things enabled by default, and you have your time interval down to 1 minute, and this is for SSH, Telnet, HTTPS, FTP, and then you can also do Samba and Apple file sharing protocol. Although someone trying to access with the wrong name on one of those is probably a local user, because I really hope you're not sharing Samba on.
Ooh, the call's coming from inside the house.
Oh, if you're doing Samba shares over the internet, Godspeed. But on here, same type of thing. Now, these four are enabled by default. You can enable all these things across the board.
QNAP recently changed this layout, didn't they?
Yeah, so when I was looking at this, when we wrote up the news article, I must have been one rev behind. The failed login attempts used to be a drop-down menu. Now you can actually input the field. And this is pretty nice because before, I think it might have been like 5 or 10 for failed login attempts, and I like a really low number. And preferably, if you're in a really trusted environment and you have like saved passwords on a phone, or you're in like Chrome or something, you're probably going to have that password filled in. So you could, like, I get by with one failed login attempt and you're booted. But I like 1 or 2 on here, because if it's 2, you get 1 shot. If it's 1, I mean, sorry, but you can fix it yourself from another computer. Or you can have yourself on the whitelist, so it doesn't really matter if you select the wrong password. You can just fix it after the fact. But here, your time interval, so over what span do you want to monitor for failed attempts? Here you want a really big number to capture any multiple attempts from the same IP address. And then failed login attempts 1 or 2, and then block length. I like to keep these guys forever, because if it's a nefarious user, you want it to be on that forever list forever. If it's if you accidentally blocked yourself on vacation or something, you were on the whitelist, there's ways to get around this by using another guest computer, using a phone or something like that, where it might be a different IP address. But it gives you the chance to go back to the list as it populates. Like, okay, that was the IP address that should have been blocked, and remove it yourself. But with some of these things, you really need to take the brute force approach on the other side of the spectrum of you want to overprotect yourself. You don't want to have something that can be easily bypassed by another user. You want something where you have multiple attempts coming into your NAS, block them, sort out the damage later, but do something to protect your files, because most people are like, okay, well, I'm running like RAID 6 and ZFS or error correction, and I'm hoping it's set up strong enough that if a drive fails or a piece of hardware fails, my folders is still there. Mm-hmm. Now, what if someone logs in and deletes those files, and then goes in and sees that you're doing a backup job and deletes the backup job? I mean, those are the types of things where an enterprise might think of making sure those things are firewalled off or air gaps, but the average home user is more likely not doing those, either through cost or just not.
Well, and just assuming too much about security in any of these products. I mean, this is not picking on Synology and QNAP. This happens to almost every device ever created that has access to the internet. Yeah. WD went through it with their MyBook Cloud things.
And there was one NAS vendor that I believe presented their admin page with clear text
passwords. Yeah. It happens all the time. What's the other thing, though? They've got a little security consultant app through QNAP.
So here you have to install it, and so it was on here by default, and this one I just brought up from a base install, so we verified I had installed again. But it's this little security counselor guy, and you select what type of policy you're going to be going after. Click Scan Now, and we'll give you a basic checkup of what things are enabled and guidance on what to disable. So in here, it says QTS does allow the installation of applications without a valid domain signature, which
It's
for
only
most,
orange. It's not red.
yeah, for most users, I think being able to install stuff without a valid signature is probably not a big deal because if you're installing apps, you might also fall into the group that could be installing apps that are compatible, but maybe not a part of the official QNAP store.
Right.
So you can always fix that and then make it happy again. So here we click apply, and I'm hoping when it rescans, it gets that area green again. And this will do a basic frontline check to make sure, yeah, excellent, everything's green.
For now, give it a couple weeks of usage, and I'm sure we can make it upset.
Yeah, but it gives you a nice 1 or 2 second process of scanning how your thing is currently deployed. Good for day one setups, and tells you about things that you can close down or fix right away. A lot of security approaches, it's great to fix it before it becomes a problem, and it's kind of annoying, but you'd rather be like, hey, I'm annoyed because I have to spend another 5 minutes to set this thing up, versus your stuff is deleted or your entire NAS is encrypted or it's on fire because...
Well, and this is good policy too for any of those systems resellers, integrators out there that are delivering these to clients as a front line of defense. They're professionals, so they're already doing it, but just a handy reminder and a good thing to give customers a tour of as well to show that you've thought about security.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of these things, if they've been out for a while, like our fresh installation probably had different default options than one that might have been out in the field for a year or two.
Well, that's a good point, because on my Synology, for instance, I still had the admin user because it was a really old install.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, it's pretty easy to get these things going.
Okay, so we walked through that was QNAP that we just finished. We walked through Synology, so we've given you an idea of where to start. If you've got a NAS, certainly take a look at which of these settings make sense to you. I think getting rid of the admin account. I even did it on my personal NAS, which is saying a lot.
So the admin account is one where...
Mostly because I'm lazy.
Yeah. Well, with the admin account, if it's one that's already been set up for a long time, you probably still have that in place. Now, if you've just recently set it up, none of them really, at least Synology and QNAP, don't allow you to use admin as a default username.
Right.
So you have to have something different in place already. But that's probably the first step of make sure that's not out there.
Right.
Use anything else, and then strong password, but also block attempts.
Yeah, the block attempts is a big one, and it's actually funny because when you start looking in the logs and see these things, that's another thing, right? Is just being aware of the data, because a lot of people don't even know that they're under attack because they haven't gotten that email for ransomware. But if you look at the logs, you can see some of that little pinging activity.
Yeah, and you'll see like admin, administrator, domain user, like really broad generic usernames, but a lot of those are common for Linux and Windows environments, so they're going to try everything and then start working through common password types. Like,
Data stud.
Yes.
All right, so if you have a NAS, look at the settings for at least that we went through here with QNAP and Synology. It's really worth looking into, see what applies to you. If you know somebody that just got one of these, make sure they see this and are aware of the vulnerabilities. Thanks for tuning in.